A black boy shouted, "I don't need money, just help my mom," to a millionaire. But the next day, a lawyer knocked on their door with shocking news. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The dawn light filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment, casting weak shadows across the worn carpet. 12-year-old Marcus Johnson stood in the doorway of his mother's bedroom, watching the slight tremors that shook her sleeping form, even in rest. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for the day ahead. In the tiny kitchen, Marcus moved with practiced efficiency, preparing a simple breakfast of toast and instant oatmeal. His movements were precise, almost adult-like. A boy who had been forced to grow up too quickly. As the kettle whistled, he glanced at the stack of envelopes on the counter, their red "Final Notice" stamps visible even from across the room. "Marcus?" His mother's voice called weakly from the bedroom. "Is that you?" "Coming, Mom," he replied, arranging her breakfast on their one uncracked plate. Denise Johnson sat propped against her pillows, her once strong nurse's hands now trembling uncontrollably. Her dark hair was streaked prematurely with gray, her face gaunt but still beautiful. As Marcus entered, she tried to smile, but even that simple gesture seemed to require tremendous effort. "You didn't have to make breakfast again," she said, her words slightly slurred, another symptom of the advanced multiple sclerosis that had devastated her body over the past 3 years. "It's no problem." Marcus set the tray carefully across her lap and perched on the edge of the bed. "How are the tremors today?" "The same," Denise answered, though they both knew they were worse. Her right hand jerked suddenly, spilling a bit of oatmeal. Marcus quickly dabbed it with a napkin. He remembered when things had been different, when his mother would rush around their larger apartment in her blue scrubs, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, keys jingling as she prepared for another shift at the pediatric ward. In his memory, she was always in motion, always helping someone. The children at the hospital had adored Nurse Denise, with her gentle touch and seemingly endless patience. Now she struggled to feed herself. "Here, Mom. Let me help with your medicine." Marcus reached for the orange prescription bottle on the nightstand, twisting the cap off with ease. The tremors made it nearly impossible for Denise to manage the child-proof caps. He counted out the pills, 2 large white ones, 1 small blue, checking them against the dosage chart he'd taped to the wall. The medications were becoming less effective each month, but they were all the insurance would cover after Denise lost her job and the premium health benefits that came with it. "After breakfast, I'm going to the library to study," Marcus said, helping his mother guide the spoon to her mouth. It wasn't exactly a lie. He would go to the library, just not for studying. For the past week, he'd been researching experimental treatments for MS, spending hours on public computers taking detailed notes. There was one treatment in particular, a new protocol involving neural remyelination that showed incredible promise in early trials. But it was experimental, expensive, and not covered by their bare-bones insurance. The crumpled prescription in his pocket felt heavy, like a stone. Dr. Mitchell had written it reluctantly, saying, "This is the treatment she needs, Marcus, but I have to be honest. Without premium insurance or significant financial resources, it's unlikely she'll be able to access it." After helping his mother finish breakfast and making sure she was settled with her book and water within reach, Marcus gathered his backpack. "I won't be too late," he promised, kissing her forehead. "Study hard," Denise said, her eyes full of pride despite everything. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. His mother had been educated, skilled, respected in her profession. None of that had mattered when Hawthorne Industries restructured and eliminated her position after her diagnosis made her miss too many shifts. At the public library, Marcus didn't head to the study tables. Instead, he went straight to a computer in the back corner and logged in. His search history was filled with medical terms beyond his years, experimental MS treatments, neural remyelination therapy, compassionate use programs. After an hour of research, Marcus made his decision. He printed out directions to Chicago Memorial Hospital, where the top neurologists in the region practiced. According to his research, many pharmaceutical executives and hospital administrators had offices there. Someone would listen. Someone had to. The bus ride to the affluent north side of Chicago took nearly an hour. Marcus clutched the prescription paper in his hand, rehearsing what he would say. The crinkled paper had become his mother's lifeline, and he wouldn't waste this chance. Chicago Memorial Hospital loomed before him, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to belong to another world entirely. Marcus straightened his only collared shirt and approached the revolving doors with determination beyond his years. For 2 hours, Marcus stationed himself near the executive entrance, approaching anyone in an expensive suit. Most brushed past without acknowledging him. Some gave him pitying glances. A few security guards warned him not to bother the executives, but something in his earnest demeanor made them hesitate to remove him completely. "Please, sir, I don't want money. I just need help for my mom," Marcus called out as a man in an impeccable suit emerged from the revolving doors, flanked by security personnel and a waiting chauffeur. The man, tall, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority, briefly paused, his eyes meeting Marcus's for a moment, before he gave a slight nod to his security detail. "I'm sorry, young man. Mr. Hawthorne doesn't take unscheduled appointments," said the largest of the security guards, moving to intercept Marcus. But desperation made Marcus quick. He ducked under the guard's outstretched arm and thrust the prescription toward the businessman. "She was a nurse at your company before she got sick and was fired without benefits," he shouted, words tumbling out in a rush. "I don't need money, I just want someone to help my mom." Thomas Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Industries, whose name adorned buildings across Chicago, froze, his hand halfway extended toward the car door. His eyes narrowed as he examined the name on the prescription. "Denise Johnson, from the pediatric ward?" he asked, his voice suddenly devoid of its authoritative tone. "Yes, sir. She took care of a lot of kids there for years," Marcus replied, confusion evident in his face at the sudden change in the executive's demeanor. "Charlotte," Thomas murmured, almost inaudibly, a flash of something. Recognition, pain, guilt, crossing his features before his executive mask slipped back into place. To Marcus's surprise, the man carefully folded the prescription and tucked it into his inner suit pocket. "Boy, where do you live?" Before Marcus could answer, sirens wailed nearby, and one of the security guards approached urgently. "Sir, we need to go. Police are clearing homeless people from this area." "I'm not homeless," Marcus protested, but the security guard was already steering him away from the executive. "I live in the Westlake housing complex, apartment 412. Please, sir." Thomas Hawthorne slid into his waiting limousine, watching through the tinted window as the boy was escorted away, still calling out desperately. As the car pulled into Chicago's midday traffic, he removed the prescription from his pocket, studying it with an inscrutable expression. "James," he spoke into his car phone, "I need you to pull employment records for a former nurse named Denise Johnson from our corporate hospital division. Priority level." In the high-rise Hawthorne building downtown, Thomas strode through his plush executive suite, ignoring the stares of his employees. He rarely appeared so distracted, so singularly focused. His assistant hurried after him with a stack of messages, but he waved her away. "Get me everything on Denise Johnson. Personnel files, medical records, current address, everything. And clear my schedule for the afternoon." That evening, Marcus helped his mother take her evening medications, watching helplessly as a particularly violent tremor seized her body. "Marcus, you got home late today," Denise said, trying to steady herself against the couch cushions. "Where were you?" "Studying at the library," he lied, unable to admit his failed day of begging for help. What good would it do to tell her? It would only add to her burden, knowing her son was reduced to pleading with strangers. He had just helped her settle when loud knocking rattled their apartment door. Marcus froze, his heart pounding. Was it social services again, or worse? The landlord, coming about the overdue rent. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to find a trim man in an expensive suit holding a leather portfolio. "Marcus Johnson?" the man asked, his tone professional but not unkind. "My name is James Wilson, attorney for the Hawthorne Foundation. May I come in?" The lawyer extended a business card, its embossed gold lettering catching the dim hallway light. "I believe we have some matters of significant importance to discuss regarding your mother's medical care." James Wilson sat stiffly on the edge of the worn couch in the Johnsons' modest living room, his designer suit looking jarringly out of place against the faded furniture. He placed his leather portfolio on the coffee table with deliberate care, as if trying to minimize contact with the scratched surface. "As I mentioned, I represent the Hawthorne Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Hawthorne Industries," Wilson explained, his voice measured and professional. "Mr. Hawthorne has taken a personal interest in your mother's case." Marcus stood protectively near Denise's armchair, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would someone like Thomas Hawthorne care about us?" Wilson opened his portfolio and removed several documents. "Mr. Hawthorne has authorized me to offer comprehensive medical coverage for an experimental treatment protocol for multiple sclerosis. All expenses would be covered by the foundation, including rehabilitation, medication, and any necessary accommodations." Denise's trembling hands clutched the armrests of her chair. "This doesn't make any sense. Why would one of the richest men in Chicago suddenly want to help someone like me?" "I understand your confusion, Ms. Johnson," Wilson replied, sliding a document across the table. "I believe you previously worked at Hawthorne Memorial's pediatric ward." "For 11 years, Denise confirmed, her voice stronger when speaking of her former career. "Until I was let go during the restructuring 3 years ago." Marcus leaned forward, examining the papers. His eyes caught phrases like experimental protocol and waiver of liability, causing his stomach to tighten. The opportunity seemed miraculous, but something felt off. "So this is charity? From the company that fired my mom when she got sick?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Wilson's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "The decision to include your mother in this program comes directly from Mr. Hawthorne himself. Beyond that, I'm not privy to his personal motivations." Denise attempted to reach for the documents, but a severe tremor seized her arm. Marcus quickly retrieved the papers for her, his heart breaking as he watched his once capable mother struggle with such a simple task. "I don't want charity," Denise said quietly, her eyes scanning the first page. "Especially not from Hawthorne Industries." "This isn't charity, Ms. Johnson," Wilson countered smoothly. "The treatment protocol is experimental. Your participation would provide valuable data. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement." After Wilson left, promising to return tomorrow for their decision, Marcus sat beside his mother in silence. The stack of documents loomed on the coffee table like a mirage, too good to be true, yet too substantial to dismiss. "What do you think, Mom?" Marcus finally asked. Denise gazed at the papers, her medical training allowing her to understand more of the technical aspects than most patients would. "The treatment approach is innovative. They're targeting remyelination directly instead of just managing symptoms." She sighed heavily. "But experimental treatments come with risks, Marcus, significant ones." "Bigger risks than doing nothing?" Marcus challenged gently. That night, Marcus lay awake in his small bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, he could hear his mother's occasional whimpers as tremors disrupted her sleep. The prescription he'd shown Thomas Hawthorne had been for this exact experimental treatment, the one that insurance would never cover, the one that might actually help rather than just slow the inevitable decline. Yet, something about the situation nagged at him. Why would Thomas Hawthorne, a billionaire CEO known for ruthless business practices, suddenly develop a conscience about one former employee? Morning brought a pale light through the window and a decision. Marcus helped Denise dress in her best outfit, a simple blouse and skirt that had grown loose on her diminishing frame. They would at least hear the complete proposal. "You convinced me," Denise said as Marcus carefully brushed her hair. "Not because I want Hawthorne's help, but because I can't bear seeing what this is doing to you, Marcus. You're 12. You should be playing video games and worrying about homework, not researching medical treatments and helping your mother bathe." A sleek black limousine arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. Marcus had never ridden in such a vehicle, and despite his reservations, he couldn't help but marvel at the plush leather seats and tinted windows that shielded them from the curious stares of their neighbors. The contrast between their lives and Thomas Hawthorne's world became even more apparent as they approached the gleaming Hawthorne Tower in downtown Chicago. 70 stories of glass and steel pierced the sky, the giant H logo near the top visible from miles away. The executive elevator whisked them directly to the penthouse floor, where they were led through a series of increasingly ornate reception areas. Finally, they reached a massive office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. Thomas Hawthorne rose from behind an imposing desk as they entered. In person, without the hurried context of their sidewalk encounter, he cut an even more impressive figure. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. "Miss Johnson, Marcus, thank you for coming," he greeted them, his voice surprisingly warm. "Please, sit down." Once they were settled, Denise in a comfortable chair that seemed to have been specially selected to accommodate her condition, Thomas got straight to the point. "I want to offer you access to an experimental treatment protocol that shows exceptional promise for advanced MS cases like yours, Ms. Johnson. Full coverage, no expenses to you whatsoever." "Why?" Denise asked directly, her medical training evident in her no-nonsense approach. Thomas's expression softened unexpectedly. "Your son mentioned you worked in the pediatric ward at our hospital. What he might not know is that you once treated my daughter, Charlotte." Marcus looked up sharply. "I didn't tell you that." "You didn't have to," Thomas replied. "I recognized your mother's name immediately. 3 years ago, Charlotte was visiting the pediatric ward as part of a charity event when she suffered a severe asthma attack. The other staff panicked, but your mother—" He turned to Denise. "You remained completely calm. You knew exactly what to do when seconds mattered. You saved my daughter's life." Denise's brow furrowed as she searched her memory. "I remember a young girl, dark hair like yours. It was during the Christmas toy drive?" Thomas nodded, a flash of emotion crossing his face before his executive composure returned. "Charlotte is the most important person in my life. I never forgot what you did, Ms. Johnson." As Thomas explained the treatment protocol in detail, Marcus watched his mother's face. Her medical background allowed her to ask pointed, technical questions that sometimes seemed to surprise even Thomas. The treatment involved stimulating the body's natural remyelination processes through a combination of specialized medications and targeted therapy, cutting-edge science that wasn't yet available to the general public. However, as the conversation progressed, Marcus began noticing inconsistencies. Thomas was detailed about the benefits but vague about potential risks. When Denise pressed for specific data, he skillfully redirected the conversation. During a momentary lull when Thomas stepped away to retrieve additional materials, Marcus's gaze wandered to a framed photograph on a side table. It showed a younger Thomas with a smiling, dark-haired girl, presumably Charlotte. What caught Marcus's attention was that she sat in a wheelchair. When Thomas returned, he carried a thick folder of documents. "These require your signature, Ms. Johnson." Standard confidentiality agreements, liability waivers, consent forms, all typical for experimental treatments. Denise's hands trembled as she attempted to take the papers. This all sounds promising, Mr. Hawthorne, but as a nurse I know that experimental treatments carry significant risks. Your materials emphasize potential benefits but say little about possible complications. Thomas's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. All medical procedures involve some risk, of course, but our preliminary data is extremely encouraging. Marcus, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke up. If it's so encouraging, why isn't it FDA approved yet? Bureaucracy, Thomas answered smoothly. The approval process takes years. Meanwhile, patients like your mother suffer. We're simply creating a pathway for those who can't afford to wait. After another hour of discussion, Denise surprised Marcus by agreeing to sign the documents. Her hand shook violently as she attempted to hold the pen, and Thomas politely averted his gaze as Marcus helped steady her wrist so she could sign her name. As they prepared to leave, Thomas walked them to the elevator. A car will pick you up tomorrow morning to begin the initial assessment. We'll arrange for your things to be moved to a more suitable apartment, one closer to the treatment facility and properly equipped for your needs. In the elevator, Marcus finally asked the question that had been bothering him. Mom, are you sure about this? It all happened so fast? Denise leaned heavily against him, the lengthy meeting having drained her limited energy. No, I'm not sure. But what choice do we have? The conventional treatments aren't working anymore. As the limousine carried them back to their apartment, Marcus noticed his mother watching the passing city with a mixture of hope and apprehension. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine a future where she might improve rather than steadily decline. At home, Marcus helped Denise into bed for an afternoon rest. The meeting had exhausted her, and her tremors were particularly severe. As he adjusted her pillows, she caught his hand. I accepted because I trust you, son. But there's something in this whole story that Thomas Hawthorne isn't telling us. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of Denise's private room at Chicago Memorial Hospital, casting warm rectangles across the polished floor. Marcus sat in a cushioned chair beside his mother's bed, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest as she slept. Each beep from the sophisticated monitoring equipment reassured him of her stability, even as his mind raced with lingering doubts. 3 weeks had passed since James Wilson's unexpected visit, and their lives had transformed with dizzying speed. The substantial settlement deposited into Denise's account had allowed them to move from their cramped apartment into a spacious, wheelchair-accessible condo closer to the hospital. The experimental treatment had been approved with record-breaking swiftness, bypassing what Marcus had learned were normally years-long waiting periods. Despite these apparent miracles, something gnawed at Marcus's conscience. Yesterday, during Thomas Hawthorne's surprise visit, he had overheard a tense conversation between the billionaire and Dr. Patel in the hallway outside his mother's room. We're administering the treatment exactly as you ordered, the neurologist had said, his voice low but clear enough for Marcus to hear through the partially open door. I need to warn you that the preliminary results— I don't care about preliminary results, Thomas had interrupted sharply. Just continue. The memory of that exchange sent a chill down Marcus's spine, despite the warm room. Nurse Sarah entered, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking slightly against the floor. Her kind face brightened upon seeing Marcus. How is she today? She asked, moving to check the IV line. The tremors seem worse, Marcus replied, pointing to his mother's hands where slight spasms were visible even in sleep. Shouldn't the treatment be helping by now? Sarah's eyes darted away momentarily before she busied herself checking vital signs. Sometimes it takes time to take effect, she said, though something in her tone sounded hollow. Dr. Patel will be making rounds soon. You can ask him directly. Marcus nodded, not entirely satisfied with her response. He'd grown adept at reading adults' expressions over the past 3 years of his mother's illness, the slight aversions of gaze, the careful choice of words that meant they were hiding something. After school that afternoon, Marcus returned to find Thomas Hawthorne waiting in the hospital lobby, holding a folder of school materials. The billionaire looked somewhat out of place amid the everyday visitors, his tailored suit and commanding presence drawing curious glances. "I thought we might review your math lessons today," Thomas offered with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your teacher mentioned you've fallen behind with all the disruptions." Marcus hesitated. He hadn't expected Thomas to take such a personal interest in his education. Still, he nodded and followed the man to a small conference room the hospital had provided for their use. As Thomas explained algebra equations with surprising patience, Marcus gathered his courage. "Why are you really helping us?" he asked during a pause. "The lawyer mentioned something about my mom saving your daughter." Thomas tensed visibly, his pencil hovering over the notebook. "Charlotte was 6 when she had a severe asthma attack during a charity visit to the pediatric ward where your mother worked," he said after a moment. "The other staff panicked, but Denise, she remained calm and saved my daughter's life." "So, it's gratitude?" Marcus pressed. "Partly that." Thomas set down the pencil and leaned back in his chair. "And partly guilt. Your mother was terminated during a corporate restructuring that I approved without reviewing the details. I never imagined people like her would be affected." The answer seemed rehearsed, as if Thomas had anticipated this question. Before Marcus could probe further, alarms blared from down the hallway. Both sprang to their feet as hospital staff rushed toward Denise's room, a code blue announcement echoing through the corridors. Marcus raced behind them, his heart hammering against his ribs, but was stopped by an orderly at the door. Through the small window, he could see his mother convulsing on the bed, her body arching unnaturally as Dr. Patel shouted orders to the responding team. "What's happening?" Marcus cried, feeling Thomas's hands gripping his shoulders from behind. "Treatment reaction," a nurse murmured as she rushed past with additional equipment. Thomas's face had drained of color. "Impossible. We tested extensively." "You knew this could happen?" Marcus accused, wrenching himself free from the billionaire's grasp. "Is that why you were arguing with Dr. Patel yesterday?" "Marcus, it's not what you're thinking. You're using my mom as a guinea pig for some experimental treatment from your company, aren't you?" Marcus shouted, tears streaming down his face. "You never wanted to help. You just wanted to test your new drug." Thomas reached for him, his expression pained. "Please, let me explain." But Marcus was already running down the opposite corridor, his vision blurred by tears. As he rounded a corner, he collided with a medication cart, sending several vials crashing to the floor. "I'm sorry," he gasped, dropping to his knees to help the startled nurse gather the scattered items. As he reached for a fallen vial, his hand froze. The small glass container bore the unmistakable Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals logo, and beneath it, printed in red, Phase 1, Clinical Trial. The nurse quickly snatched it away, but not before Marcus had seen it clearly. Their eyes met briefly, hers alarmed, his filling with horrified understanding. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly. "Please go to the waiting area." Marcus backed away slowly, mind racing. Phase 1 trials were the earliest stage of testing, often the first time a drug was used in humans. He knew this from his research, and he knew the risks associated with such early-stage treatments. In the waiting area, he found a quiet corner and pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he searched for information about Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals and clinical trials. The company's website mentioned several neurological drugs in development, including an innovative remyelination therapy currently in preclinical evaluation. Preclinical, not even Phase 1 yet, not approved for human testing. The realization crashed over him like a wave of ice water. His mother wasn't receiving an established experimental treatment. She was the experiment itself. An hour later, Dr. Patel emerged from Denise's room, looking exhausted. He spotted Marcus immediately and approached with measured steps. "Your mother is stable now," he said, his voice gentle but clinical. "She experienced what we call an adverse reaction to the treatment protocol, but we've administered counteractive agents that have resolved the immediate crisis." "What kind of adverse reaction?" Marcus demanded, no longer caring about being polite to adults who had been lying to him. Dr. Patel glanced around before responding. "A neurological event. Sometimes when we attempt to repair damaged myelin, the body can react unpredictably." "Was this expected? Did you know this could happen?" The doctor's silence was answer enough. "I want to see her," Marcus insisted. "She's sedated now, but you can sit with her. Just understand that she'll be unresponsive for several hours." Marcus entered the darkened room where his mother lay frighteningly still, connected to more machines than before. Her face was pale, almost gray, and a new monitoring device had been attached to her head, tiny electrodes disappearing into her hair. He took her limp hand, horrified by how cold it felt. "I'm here, Mom," he whispered. "I'm going to figure this out, I promise." From the hallway, Marcus could hear Thomas's voice engaged in a heated phone conversation. "I don't care what the board thinks," the billionaire was saying. "The protocol continues as planned. We've already discussed the possibility of initial adverse reactions. No, absolutely not. We're not terminating the treatment." Marcus's grip on his mother's hand tightened. The man who had presented himself as their savior was treating Denise as nothing more than a test subject, a means to develop a profitable new drug. Later that evening, while a different nurse checked Denise's vitals, Marcus slipped out to the nurses' station. The unit was quieter now, with reduced staffing for the night shift. Most of the medical personnel were focused on a new admission at the far end of the hall. With everyone distracted, Marcus spotted an unattended tablet computer, the kind he'd seen doctors using to access patient records. Acting on impulse, he grabbed it and quickly retreated to an empty consultation room. The device was password protected, but he noticed a sticky note attached to the back with what appeared to be login credentials, a careless but common practice he'd observed during their hospital stays. His hands shaking, he entered the information and gained access to the patient database. It took only moments to locate his mother's file. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Pages of technical documentation describing Subject 01 in an unauthorized preliminary human trial of a compound called HTNR7, a neural regeneration agent developed by Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals. One note, dated just 3 days ago, read, "Subject showing concerning neural activity in regions 4 and 7. TH advised an ordered continuation, despite recommendations for protocol adjustment." Marcus stared at the screen, a cold fury building inside him. He quickly took photos of several key pages using his phone before returning the tablet, his decision made. Thomas Hawthorne thought he could use Denise Johnson as a laboratory rat for his company's untested drug. He believed his money and power would shield him from consequences. He was wrong. As Marcus slipped back into his mother's room, a new determination hardened within him. He would gather evidence, document everything, and if necessary, expose what was really happening, even if it meant going up against one of the most powerful men in Chicago. "I won't let them hurt you anymore, Mom," he whispered, gently squeezing her unresponsive hand. "I won't let them get away with this." "I can hear you, you know." Marcus whirled around to find Thomas standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the corridor light. "Talking to yourself is perfectly natural in stressful situations," the billionaire continued, stepping into the room. "I just came to tell you that your mother's condition has stabilized, and we're adjusting the protocol to prevent further incidents." Marcus positioned himself protectively between Thomas and the bed. "Why is there a Phase 1 clinical trial label on her medication when your website says the drug is still in preclinical testing?" And why does her chart identify her as Subject 01? Thomas's expression shifted, genuine surprise evident in his features. How did you... You're using my mom as a guinea pig for some treatment experimental drug from your company, aren't you? Marcus cut him off, his voice shaking with rage. You never wanted to help. You just wanted to test your new medication. The ICU of Chicago Memorial Hospital maintained an eerie silence at 3 a.m, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors connected to Denise. Marcus sat rigidly in the chair beside her bed, holding his mother's unresponsive hand while watching doctors conferring in hushed whispers on the other side of the glass door. Dr. Patel finally entered the room, his face etched with exhaustion after the hours-long battle to stabilize Denise's condition. His white coat was rumpled, and his eyes were bloodshot from the stress of the emergency. She's stabilized, but still in critical condition, he informed Marcus, checking the monitors once more. The reaction to the treatment was severe, but we managed to reverse the worst of it. Marcus didn't respond, just fixed the doctor with a gaze of contained anger. In the 3 days since his mother's collapse, he had been collecting information, whispered conversations between nurses, partially visible documents on clipboards, and quick online research about Hawthorne Industries' pharmaceutical division that confirmed his suspicions. The experimental treatment wasn't FDA approved, was it? Marcus finally asked, his voice betraying exhaustion and fury. You're using my mom as a guinea pig. Dr. Patel sighed deeply, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. Marcus, the situation is complex. Mr. Hawthorne expedited a promising treatment that almost killed her, Marcus interrupted, standing abruptly. He doesn't care about her. He just wants data for his new drug. That's not entirely fair, Dr. Patel said cautiously. The treatment has genuine potential to help your mother. Yes, there are risks, and yes, the normal approval channels were abbreviated. But the intent was to help patients like your mother who don't have time to wait for conventional approvals. You should have told us the truth, Marcus said, his voice breaking. We had a right to know what was really happening. You're right, Dr. Patel admitted, and I advocated for more transparency from the beginning. But Mr. Hawthorne was concerned that excess information might cause unnecessary worry. Unnecessary? Marcus gestured toward his mother's still form. Look at her. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, Marcus stormed out of the room, needing space to breathe. In the corridor, he found Thomas Hawthorne intensely engaged in a phone conversation, his back to Marcus. I don't care what the legal department says, Thomas was saying sharply. The protocol continues. We're seeing cellular responses that validate our entire approach. Hearing footsteps, the billionaire quickly ended his call, turning to face Marcus with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marcus, I was just looking for you. I have news that might help your mother. You've helped enough, Marcus responded coldly, crossing his arms. I found out everything. The experimental drug, the unapproved tests. You're using my mom because you couldn't get legitimate test subjects for your new MS drug. Thomas looked genuinely shocked, his composure slipping momentarily. That's not what's happening. Yes, the medication is developed by my company, but I'm going to expose you, Marcus threatened, pulling out his phone. I recorded conversations between the doctors. I have photos of the documents. How much do you think your stock will be worth when the public finds out you're testing experimental drugs on desperate people? Thomas's face visibly paled. Marcus, please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You used us. You pretended to want to help when all you wanted was clinical data. A security guard approached, alerted by their escalating voices. Is there a problem, Mr. Hawthorne? Marcus stared defiantly at Thomas, expecting to be escorted out or worse. Instead, the businessman waved the guard away and guided Marcus toward an empty consultation room, closing the door behind them. Once inside, Thomas ran his hands through his silver-streaked hair, looking suddenly older and less like the polished corporate titan. "You're partially right," he admitted, slumping into one of the chairs. "The drug is experimental. We haven't completed the standard FDA approval process, but I'm not just randomly testing it. This treatment was specifically developed for advanced cases like your mother's." "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Marcus demanded, remaining standing. "Because cases like hers were rejected for regular clinical trials for being considered too risky," Thomas explained. "The standard protocols exclude patients with advanced neurological damage because they're statistically more likely to experience adverse reactions. That makes the overall trial data look worse, even if the medication helps many patients." "So my mom was expendable?" Marcus's voice trembled with rage. "No, that's not—" Thomas stopped himself, taking a deep breath. "Let me explain something I haven't told anyone outside my immediate family. Charlotte, my daughter who your mother saved, she has multiple sclerosis too, diagnosed 2 years ago." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What?" "It's an aggressive form, similar to your mother's. The standard treatments aren't working," Thomas continued, his corporate facade crumbling entirely. "I assembled the best research team money could buy to develop something new, something that might actually reverse the damage instead of just slowing it down." "So you're testing it on my mom first, before your own daughter?" Thomas looked away, shame evident in his expression. "The regulators wouldn't approve human trials yet. They wanted another year of animal studies. Charlotte doesn't have another year. Your mother probably doesn't either. That doesn't give you the right to—" Suddenly, alarms blared from the direction of Denise's room. They both rushed out to find nurses and doctors racing through the doorway. Through the chaos, Marcus could see his mother's body jerking violently on the bed, machines screaming warnings as Dr. Patel shouted orders. "Severe arrhythmia," a nurse called out. "Blood pressure dropping." "Start the crash protocol," Dr. Patel ordered, his calm professionalism belying the emergency unfolding. "No, no, no!" Marcus screamed, trying to push his way into the room, only to be held back by a nurse. "You can't be in there right now," she said firmly but kindly. "Let them work." Through the glass, Marcus watched in horror as the medical team worked frantically around his mother. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, seconds feeling like hours as he observed the desperate effort to save her life. Dr. Patel applied defibrillator paddles to Denise's chest. "Clear!" he shouted, and her body jumped with the electric shock. The heart monitor continued its ominous flat tone. "Again! Clear!" Another shock, another moment of breathless waiting. Still nothing. "Pushing epinephrine," a nurse announced, injecting medication directly into an IV line. Marcus felt his knees weaken, Thomas's strong hand suddenly supporting him as he started to collapse. The billionaire's face was ashen, his own breathing rapid and shallow. "This is my fault," Thomas whispered, almost to himself. "I pushed too hard, too fast." Inside the room, Dr. Patel began chest compressions, counting rhythmically as he pressed down on Denise's sternum. Minutes crawled by, the team rotating through different interventions with practiced precision but increasing desperation. Finally, the words Marcus had been dreading. No response. Time of death. 3:42 a.m. A primal sound escaped Marcus's throat, not quite a scream, not quite a sob, as he collapsed completely, Thomas lowering him gently to the floor. The world seemed to dissolve around him, sound becoming distant and vision tunneling to a narrow focus. "My mom is gone." The thought echoed hollowly through his mind. "She's gone, and I couldn't save her." Then, through his grief-stricken haze, he heard Dr. Patel's voice suddenly rise with urgency. "Wait! I have a faint pulse. She's coming back." The medical team sprang back into action, a new energy infusing their movements. "Sinus rhythm establishing," a nurse called out, BP rising slowly. "Pupils responsive," another reported. getting brain activity on the monitor. Marcus struggled to his feet, pressing closer to the glass, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. The flat line on the heart monitor had indeed transformed into irregular but definite peaks and valleys, the visual representation of a heart finding its rhythm again. Dr. Patel emerged from the room 20 minutes later, sweat soaking through his scrubs. "She's stabilized," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I can't explain it medically, but she's fighting back. We're keeping her in a medically induced coma to give her brain time to recover from the oxygen deprivation." "Will she?" Marcus couldn't finish the question. "It's too early to say," the doctor answered honestly. "She was clinically dead for almost 4 minutes. There's likely to be some neurological damage, but the extent won't be clear until she regains consciousness, if she regains consciousness." Marcus turned to Thomas, whose face reflected a complex mixture of relief, guilt, and something else. Something that looked almost like scientific curiosity. "You still see her as an experiment, don't you?" Marcus accused quietly. "Even now." "Marcus, that's not fair," Thomas began, but stopped himself. "Actually, maybe it is fair. I am watching her case with scientific interest, because if she recovers, it could mean the treatment is working in ways we never anticipated. It could mean hope for Charlotte and thousands of others." Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know. The blood work we just ran shows unexpected cellular activity. The neural regeneration compound is showing increased uptake in the affected regions of her brain. It's almost as if the crisis triggered an accelerated response." Thomas's eyes widened. "You mean the treatment might be working better because of the adverse reaction?" "Theoretically possible, but we need more data," Dr. Patel cautioned. "More data," Marcus repeated bitterly. "That's all you really care about, isn't it? Not my mom, just your precious data." "Marcus," Thomas said softly, "I know you have every reason to hate me right now. But please understand, if what Dr. Patel is suggesting proves true, your mother's experience might save countless lives, including my daughter's." Marcus stared through the glass at his mother's still form, emotions warring within him. The machines that had screamed in alarm minutes ago now beeped with reassuring regularity. She had died, and then somehow she had come back. "Dr. Patel is right about one thing," Marcus finally said. "We need more data to understand what's really happening. But from now on, I want to know everything. Every test, every result, every theory. No more secrets." Thomas nodded solemnly. "You have my word." As dawn broke over Chicago, casting long shadows through the hospital windows, Marcus sat vigil beside his mother's bed, holding her hand and watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. He was exhausted, but refused to leave, afraid that if he closed his eyes, he might lose her again. Dr. Patel and Thomas stood outside the room, conversing in low tones, occasionally glancing in his direction. Despite his promise of transparency, Thomas still had secrets. Marcus could see it in his eyes. What he didn't know yet was whether those secrets would save his mother or destroy what remained of her fragile life. Marcus sat alone in the hospital chapel, a small room tucked away on the first floor, where the constant beeping of monitors and squeaking of nurses' shoes faded to a distant murmur. The room was empty save for a few rows of wooden benches and a simple altar adorned with a vase of slightly wilted flowers. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting colorful patterns across the worn carpet. Dr. Patel's words echoed in his mind. Less than 48 hours to decide whether to continue a treatment that might be killing his mother, or stop it, and accept her inevitable decline. How could a 12-year-old possibly make such a choice? The chapel door opened quietly, and Thomas Hawthorne appeared, looking uncharacteristically disheveled in his wrinkled suit. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his silver-streaked hair stood slightly on end, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "The specialists are ready," he said simply. "I've arranged a video conference with the top neurologists in the field." 10 minutes later, Marcus found himself seated at a large conference table, surrounded by screens displaying the faces of doctors from London, Tokyo, and Zurich. Dr. Patel stood at the head of the table, presenting detailed brain scans that meant little to Marcus, but sparked animated discussions among the specialists. "As you can see," Dr. Patel explained, highlighting areas on the imaging, "these regions show demyelination patterns that were not evident in Mrs. Johnson's previous scans from 6 months ago." A stern-faced woman from London leaned closer to her camera. "The progression is unusually rapid, but what's more interesting is that it wasn't detected in earlier scans. The HTNR7 compound isn't causing new damage. It's revealing the true extent of existing damage that conventional treatments were masking." "Masking?" Marcus interrupted, drawing surprised looks from the specialists. "What does that mean?" The neurologist adjusted her glasses. "Standard MS treatments often suppress symptoms while the disease continues its course beneath the surface. Think of it like painkillers treating a broken bone. They may reduce pain, but the bone remains broken. What we're seeing with your mother is the equivalent of removing that painkiller and finally seeing how severe the break actually is." "So the treatment isn't hurting her?" Marcus asked, looking from face to face on the screens. "Not exactly," Dr. Patel said cautiously. "It's revealing damage that was already there, but in doing so, it's creating a temporary crisis. The question is whether this crisis is necessary for genuine healing to begin." After the conference ended, Marcus wandered the hallway, processing what he'd learned. A text message alert drew his attention, an automated school notification about his mounting absences. The ordinary concerns of a 12-year-old seemed impossibly distant now. "Marcus?" He turned to find a girl in a wheelchair approaching him. Though he'd never met her in person, he recognized Charlotte Hawthorne immediately from the photographs in her father's office. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and despite the paleness of her face, her eyes were sharp and intelligent. "I thought it was you," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Charlotte." "I know," Marcus replied, shaking her hand awkwardly. "Your dad has pictures." Charlotte maneuvered her motorized wheelchair alongside him as they walked slowly down the corridor. "Dad told me about your mom. I'm sorry she's going through this. MS is, well, it sucks." The casual profanity from this polished, wealthy girl surprised a small laugh out of Marcus. "Yeah, it really does." "Has anyone shown you the lab?" Charlotte asked suddenly. Before Marcus could answer, she was already heading toward the elevator, gesturing for him to follow. They descended to a lower level of the hospital that required Charlotte to swipe a security card for access. The doors opened to reveal a state-of-the-art research facility that looked nothing like the clinical areas above. "Dad built this 3 years ago," Charlotte explained as they moved through a corridor, with windows looking into various laboratories. "Right after I was diagnosed." Scientists in white coats worked at advanced equipment, barely glancing up as they passed. Charlotte stopped at a large window overlooking a central lab where a team was gathered around complex machinery. "That's where they developed the treatment your mom is receiving," she said, pointing to a sealed chamber where technicians manipulated samples through gloved ports. "Dad hired the best researchers in the world, not just for me, but for everyone with MS. I made him promise." "You made him promise?" Charlotte smiled slightly. "I told him I didn't want to be the only one who got help just because my dad was rich. That wasn't fair. I wanted him to find something that could help everyone." Marcus studied her face, seeing sincerity there, but also a weariness beyond her years. "How bad is it? Your MS?" "Bad enough," she answered, her fingers unconsciously adjusting the blanket over her legs. "The standard treatments worked for a while, but last year things started getting worse. I can still move my legs a little, but the doctors say without intervention I'll lose that ability within a year." That's why your dad is rushing the treatment, Marcus realized aloud. Part of it, Charlotte acknowledged, but he's also genuinely trying to help others. He just gets impatient with bureaucracy when he knows people are suffering. As they made their way back to the elevator, Marcus noticed Thomas waiting near the entrance to the research wing. The billionaire's expression softened visibly at the sight of his daughter. There you are, Charlotte. Your physical therapist has been looking for you. I was just showing Marcus the lab, she explained. Thomas nodded, then turned to Marcus with an unexpectedly vulnerable expression. I need to tell you something I should have shared from the beginning. When the corporate restructuring happened 3 years ago, I approved broad-based personnel cuts without reviewing individual cases. I never knew your mother was among those affected until you approached me outside the hospital. You fired her without even knowing who she was? Marcus asked incredulously. I signed off on a reduction of 15% across all divisions, Thomas clarified, shame evident in his voice. I never saw individual names. It wasn't until I recognized Denise as the nurse who saved Charlotte that I realized the terrible irony. The woman who saved my daughter lost her livelihood because of my decision. Marcus absorbed this information silently, watching Charlotte reach up to squeeze her father's hand supportively. That doesn't excuse what you've done, Marcus finally said. Using my mom as a test subject without telling us the whole truth. No, it doesn't, Thomas agreed. But I hope it helps you understand why this matters so much to me. It's not just about Charlotte or about profit for my company. It's about making something right that I got terribly wrong. Later that evening, Marcus sat beside his mother's bed, holding her still hand and watching the steady rhythm of her breathing. The medical coma kept her features relaxed, almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the painful spasms that had become her daily reality. As he stroked her fingers, he felt a subtle movement against his palm. Startled, he looked down to see her index finger twitch slightly. Mom, he whispered, leaning closer. Can you hear me? The finger moved again, a small but deliberate motion that sent his heart racing. He pressed the call button, and Sarah the nurse appeared moments later. Her finger moved, Marcus explained excitedly. She responded when I spoke to her. Sarah checked the monitoring equipment. Her brain activity is showing increased patterns in the motor region, she confirmed, smiling gently. That's a positive sign, though she's still heavily sedated. I'll note it in her chart for Dr. Patel. After Sarah left, Marcus continued talking to his mother, encouraged by the small response. I don't know if you can hear me, but there's so much happening, Mom. The treatment you're getting, it's more experimental than they told us. But the doctors think it might actually be working in a way they didn't expect. He paused, collecting his thoughts. Mr. Hawthorne's daughter Charlotte has MS too. That's part of why he developed this treatment. I met her today. She seems nice, even though her dad has been complicated. The door opened quietly and Marcus looked up to see Thomas's Aunt Rita, his only remaining relative, standing awkwardly in the doorway. He had called her days ago, hoping for support, but she had made excuses about being too busy. Marcus, she said stiffly, I came as soon as I could get away from work. They both knew it was a lie. Rita had never been close to them, always uncomfortable around Denise's illness. She remained for less than 15 minutes, making vague promises about helping however she could, before leaving with obvious relief. Alone again with his mother, Marcus felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. With no other family to turn to, the decisions about Denise's care rested entirely with him. A burden no 12-year-old should have to bear. I don't know what to do, Mom, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. They want me to decide whether to continue the treatment or stop it. How am I supposed to know what's right? He laid his head gently on the edge of her bed, exhaustion finally overtaking him. I wish you could tell me what to do. I'm trying so hard to make the right choices. Just as his eyes began to close, he felt it, the slightest pressure of her fingers against his. His head shot up, and he watched in amazement as his mother's fingers curled weakly around his hand when he mentioned the treatment. Outside in the corridor, Thomas and Charlotte waited anxiously, united in their own ethical and medical dilemma. Thomas paced nervously while Charlotte sat motionless in her wheelchair, both watching the door for any sign from Marcus. When he finally emerged, his face showed a determination that hadn't been there before. His red-rimmed eyes met Thomas's directly, then shifted to Charlotte before returning to the billionaire. "We're going to continue," he declared firmly, "but I have a condition." Thomas and Dr. Patel exchanged glances of surprise. "What condition?" the doctor asked cautiously. "My condition is simple," Marcus stated, surprising everyone with a maturity beyond his years. "If the treatment shows any sign of genuine improvement, Charlotte will be the next patient. We can't let fear stop us from trying to save both of them." Dr. Patel and Thomas stood in the hallway outside Denise's room, their hushed conversation occasionally punctuated by concerned glances toward Marcus. The boy's condition, that Charlotte would be the next patient if his mother showed improvement, had taken them both by surprise. "He's remarkably mature for his age," Dr. Patel observed, his voice low. "But I'm concerned about the pressure he's placing on himself." Thomas nodded, his eyes never leaving the small figure seated vigilantly beside Denise's bed. "He reminds me of Charlotte, when she was first diagnosed. That same determination to face reality head-on." "Speaking of Charlotte," Dr. Patel said, "have you discussed this possibility with her? Becoming the second patient?" Thomas's expression tightened. "She's been asking to try the treatment for months. I've been the one holding back." Inside the room, Marcus held his mother's hand, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors had become a strange comfort, each sound confirming she was still fighting. A new routine quickly established itself. Marcus attended school in the mornings, his backpack heavy with books he barely opened, his mind elsewhere as teachers lectured about subjects that suddenly seemed trivial. Each afternoon he would rush to the hospital, completing homework assignments in the chair beside his mother's bed while monitoring every slight change in her condition. 3 days after making his decision to continue the treatment, Marcus arrived to find an unfamiliar woman sitting in his usual spot. "You must be Marcus," she said, standing to offer her hand. "I'm Ms. Abernathy, sent by Mr. Hawthorne to help with your studies." Marcus hesitated before shaking her hand. "I don't need a tutor. I'm keeping up fine." Ms. Abernathy smiled gently. "Your math teacher might disagree. Let's start with that calculus assignment that was due yesterday." Despite his initial resistance, Marcus found himself grateful for the distraction. Ms. Abernathy was patient and clear, helping him work through problems without making him feel inadequate for struggling to concentrate. By the end of the week, Dr. Patel had assembled what he called the treatment team, a specialized group of neurologists, pharmacologists, and researchers dedicated exclusively to Denise's case. To Marcus's surprise, he was invited to join their first formal meeting. The conference room felt intimidating with its polished table and wall of monitors displaying brain scans and data charts. Marcus sat stiffly between Dr. Patel and Thomas, feeling painfully out of place among the white coats and advanced degrees. "The patient shows increasing neural activity in previously dormant regions," a neurologist was saying, pointing to colored areas on a brain scan. "The question is whether this represents actual remyelination or simply abnormal firing patterns." "What's the difference?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. Instead of dismissing his question, the neurologist turned to address him directly. "Excellent question. Abnormal firing patterns would just be random activity without functional improvement, essentially noise. True remyelination would mean nerve signals are actually traveling along repaired pathways." Marcus nodded, absorbing the information. "How can we tell which is happening?" "We're developing specialized response tests," the woman explained. If your mother shows improved motor responses that correspond to the active regions, that would strongly suggest actual repair is occurring. As the meeting continued, Marcus found himself asking more questions, growing more confident as the specialists responded with respect rather than condescension. Several times he noticed Thomas watching him with a thoughtful expression. After the meeting, Thomas approached him in the hallway. "You have a natural aptitude for this, Marcus. You're asking questions that even some medical students might miss." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortably. "I just want to understand what's happening to my mom." That afternoon, Charlotte began visiting Denise regularly. Marcus would sometimes arrive to find her reading aloud from novels or science magazines, speaking to the unconscious woman as if they were old friends. "I hope you don't mind," Charlotte said, when Marcus first discovered her there. "I thought she might like some company when you're at school." A subtle friendship began to form between them. Two young people connected by circumstances neither would have chosen. Charlotte taught Marcus how to understand some of the medical terminology that confused him, while he shared stories about his mother that made Denise feel real to Charlotte rather than just a patient. 3 weeks into the new treatment protocol, Thomas faced his own crisis. Marcus noticed the billionaire arriving at the hospital looking increasingly stressed, constantly checking his phone and disappearing for tense conversations. "What's going on with your dad?" Marcus finally asked Charlotte during one of their hallway conversations. Charlotte sighed heavily. "The board of directors is questioning his decisions. They're saying he's diverting too many resources to an unapproved project and threatening the company's stock value." That evening, Marcus overheard Thomas in a heated phone conversation outside the hospital cafeteria. "I don't care about the quarterly projections," Thomas was saying, his voice strained but determined. "Some things are more important than profit margins. The research continues as planned." The following morning, Marcus witnessed a rare moment that changed his perception of Thomas Hawthorne. Arriving earlier than usual, he paused outside Denise's room when he heard Thomas's voice inside. "I don't know if you can hear me, Denise," the billionaire was saying softly, "but I want you to know that your son is extraordinary. He's fighting for you with everything he has. Charlotte adores him already, says he's the first person who doesn't treat her like she's made of glass." There was a pause, and when Thomas continued, his voice sounded thicker with emotion. "I failed you once when I allowed that restructuring without considering the human cost. I won't fail you or Marcus again. I promise you that." Marcus stepped away quietly, unsure how to process this glimpse of vulnerability from the powerful man he'd come to view with such complexity, neither villain nor hero, but something more human than either. 5 weeks after Denise's crisis, the first significant breakthrough occurred. During a routine neurological response test, her fingers moved deliberately when Dr. Patel applied gentle pressure to specific points. "This is a purposeful response," Dr. Patel explained to Marcus, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "Not a reflex or random movement." The treatment team was quickly assembled, additional tests ordered, and new scans conducted. In the conference room, the atmosphere was charged with cautious optimism as Dr. Patel shared the results. "These areas," he said, highlighting multiple regions on the brain scan, "show clear signs of remyelination. They're small but unmistakable." "How is this possible?" one of the neurologists asked. "Conventional wisdom says damaged myelin doesn't regenerate this extensively." "Conventional wisdom didn't have HTNR7, Thomas replied, allowing himself a small, satisfied smile. That night, Marcus and Charlotte celebrated quietly in the hospital cafeteria, sharing a chocolate pudding cup as if it were champagne. "Does this mean you'll start the treatment soon?" Marcus asked, watching Charlotte carefully. She twirled her spoon nervously. "Dad wants more data first. He's being extra cautious with me." "But you want to try it, right?" Charlotte nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "More than anything, I'm tired of watching my body betray me a little more each day." As the weeks passed, Nurse Sarah became an unexpected ally, often sharing observations that didn't make it into the official reports. "Her tremors are decreasing in frequency," she told Marcus one evening as they watched Denise sleep. "And did you notice? Her color is better. Her skin used to be so pale, but there's more vitality now." The night Denise opened her eyes for the first time since her crisis was etched permanently in Marcus's memory. He had been reading aloud from her favorite novel when he noticed her eyelids fluttering. "Mom," he whispered, barely daring to hope. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually settling on his face. Recognition dawned in her gaze, and her lips moved slightly, though no sound emerged. Before Marcus could call for a nurse, her eyes closed again, but the moment of connection had been unmistakable. Marcus raced to the nurse's station, words tumbling out in excitement. "She woke up. She recognized me." The news spread quickly. Dr. Patel arrived within minutes, followed shortly by Thomas and Charlotte. Tests confirmed what Marcus already knew. Denise was beginning to emerge from her coma, her brain function improving beyond what anyone had predicted. "We need to proceed carefully," Dr. Patel cautioned. "Cognitive recovery will be gradual, and we still don't know the extent of any permanent damage." But Marcus couldn't contain his optimism. "She knew me," he repeated. "She looked right at me and knew who I was." That evening, as the hospital quieted for the night, Marcus sat with Charlotte in the waiting area, both too wired with hope to leave. "This means you'll be next," Marcus said. "Once they're sure the treatment is working for my mom, you'll get your chance." Charlotte reached over to squeeze his hand. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not as strong as your mom?" "You are," Marcus assured her. "Maybe in different ways, but just as strong." Thomas joined them, carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate. His phone rang as he was distributing the drinks, and Marcus noticed his expression darken as he checked the screen. "Excuse me," Thomas said tersely. "I need to take this." He stepped away, but his voice carried enough for them to catch fragments. "Absolutely not. My position as CEO is not up for discussion. This research is vital." Charlotte sighed. "The board has been threatening to remove him if he doesn't refocus on profitable ventures. They don't see the long-term value of the research." As they sipped their hot chocolate in silence, Marcus contemplated how complicated everything had become. 6 weeks ago, his only concern had been finding help for his mother. Now he was entangled in corporate politics, experimental medical treatments, and the fate of a girl who was quickly becoming a friend. Just as the medical team was celebrating the first consistent signs of recovery, Thomas's phone rang. His face grew grave as he listened to the caller, his knuckles whitening around the device. "I understand," he said finally, his voice flat. "I'll be there." He ended the call and looked at Marcus with a grim expression. "My board is calling an emergency meeting to vote on my temporary removal for conduct detrimental to company interests and misuse of corporate resources." Thomas stared at his phone, his expression hardening as the reality of the board's decision sank in. He slipped the device into his pocket and straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain his composure despite the news he'd just received. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, watching the billionaire's face closely. "I attend their meeting tomorrow and fight," Thomas replied simply. "This treatment is too important to abandon because of corporate politics." As morning arrived, Marcus returned to his mother's room to find her awake, truly awake, for the first time in weeks. Her eyes were clear and focused as she tracked his movement across the room. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse but unmistakably hers. He rushed to her bedside, tears springing to his eyes. "Mom, you're really here." Denise tried to raise her hand toward his face but could only manage a slight movement. Even that small effort seemed to exhaust her. "What happened?" she asked, each word a struggle. Before Marcus could formulate a response that wouldn't overwhelm her, Dr. Patel entered, his face lighting up when he saw Denise conscious. "Mrs. Johnson, this is wonderful progress." While the doctor performed a brief neurological assessment, Marcus stood back, watching his mother respond to simple commands. Blinking, squeezing fingers, tracking objects with her eyes. Each successful response felt like a miracle. "Your recovery is remarkable," Dr. Patel told Denise. "You've been through a significant medical event, but you're showing impressive neural regeneration." "How long?" Denise asked, her medical background evident in her focused questions despite her weakness. "You've been in a medically induced coma for nearly 7 weeks, Dr. Patel explained gently, following a severe reaction to the treatment protocol. Confusion clouded her features, but before she could ask more questions, Dr. Patel added, "We should take things slowly. Too much information at once isn't advisable." Outside in the hallway, Marcus confronted the doctor. "She deserves to know everything." "And she will," Dr. Patel assured him. "But neural recovery is delicate. Cognitive and emotional overload could set back her progress." When Marcus returned to his mother's room, she had drifted back to sleep, her body still requiring extensive rest to heal. He sat beside her, holding her hand and marveling at the simple fact that she had spoken his name, something he'd feared he might never hear again. That afternoon, Marcus checked his phone to find several news alerts about Hawthorne Industries. The business media was buzzing with rumors about Thomas's unusual activities and the company's pharmaceutical division. One headline particularly caught his eye. "Hawthorne, CEO under fire for unauthorized medical research." He clicked on the article to find speculation about Thomas diverting company resources to a personal project without proper regulatory approval. The article quoted anonymous board members expressing concern about potential legal and financial repercussions. When Thomas arrived at the hospital later that day, the toll of the corporate battle was evident in his appearance. His usual impeccable suit was slightly rumpled, and the shadows under his eyes had deepened. "My mother was awake this morning," Marcus told him immediately. "She recognized me and spoke a little." Despite his obvious exhaustion, Thomas's face brightened with genuine pleasure. "That's extraordinary news. The treatment is working even better than we hoped." He moved to enter Denise's room but paused when he saw she was sleeping. "I'll come back when she's awake. The last thing she needs is to wake up and find the CEO of Hawthorne Industries looming over her bed." "Ex-CEO?" Marcus asked quietly, nodding toward the news article displayed on his phone. Thomas's smile tightened. "Not yet, though they're certainly trying." He glanced through the window at Denise's sleeping form. "Her progress is the vindication I need. If we can document her recovery properly, it will silence the critics, both in the boardroom and the medical community." "Is that all she is to you? Documentation?" Marcus asked, the old suspicion flaring again. "No," Thomas answered firmly. "She's proof that sometimes breaking the rules is necessary when the rules themselves become obstacles to saving lives." Later that evening, Dr. Patel conducted a more comprehensive assessment of Denise's condition now that she was maintaining longer periods of consciousness. Marcus watched as his mother struggled to form words and move her limbs on command. Each small victory celebrated, each difficulty noted for targeted therapy. The areas showing remyelination are directly correlating with her. "Functional improvements," Dr. Patel explained afterward. "It's not just random neural activity, it's genuine healing." The following day, Marcus arrived at the hospital to find Charlotte sitting with his mother, introducing herself and explaining their unusual connection. "Your son has been incredibly brave," Charlotte was saying as Marcus entered. "He's practically become an honorary member of the medical team." Denise's weak smile widened when she saw Marcus. She still tired quickly, but each hour brought noticeable improvements in her speech and alertness. "You didn't tell me about her," Denise said to Marcus, her words slow but deliberate. There's a lot I haven't told you yet, Marcus admitted, sitting on the edge of her bed. I wanted to wait until you were stronger. I'm stronger than I look, Denise replied with a hint of her old determination. Charlotte maneuvered her wheelchair closer. Your recovery is giving me hope, Mrs. Johnson. I've been watching your progress very carefully. You have MS too, Denise observed, her nurse's trained eye recognizing the signs despite her weakened state. Charlotte nodded. Diagnosed 2 years ago, the conventional treatments stopped working last year. A look of understanding passed between the two women, a shared knowledge of what it meant to battle this particular disease. Denise reached out with trembling fingers and Charlotte took her hand. The treatment, that's helping me, Denise said slowly. You should try it. That's the plan, Charlotte confirmed, as soon as we have more data from your case. Marcus watched this exchange with a surge of emotion. His mother, even in her weakened state, was already thinking of helping others. Later that day, a team of specialists arrived to document Denise's progress through extensive testing and imaging. The atmosphere was one of barely contained excitement, as preliminary results confirmed what Dr. Patel had observed. Areas of her brain previously damaged by MS were showing clear signs of neural repair. This goes beyond symptom management, one neurologist commented as they reviewed the scans. We're seeing actual reversal of pathological changes previously considered permanent. Thomas arrived as the specialists were concluding their assessment, and Marcus noticed he was accompanied by a film crew. What's this? Marcus asked suspiciously. Documentation, Thomas explained. With your mother's permission, we want to record her progress. It's important for the regulatory submission. And for convincing your board, Marcus challenged. Thomas didn't deny it. For that too, but primarily because other patients deserve access to this treatment. To get that approval, we need compelling evidence. When approached about being filmed, Denise surprised Marcus by readily agreeing. If it helps others, like Charlotte, she said, I want to do it. The short video documentation turned into something unexpected when Denise, speaking slowly but with growing confidence, began sharing her experience as both a medical professional and a patient. As a nurse, I understood what MS was doing to my body, she said to the camera. But understanding doesn't prepare you for losing your independence, piece by piece. She described the progression of her symptoms, the failure of conventional treatments, and finally, the hope that came with the experimental protocol. I don't remember much of the crisis, she admitted, but I remember dreaming of walking again, of holding my son without trembling. By the time the filming concluded, even the professional camera operator was discreetly wiping away tears. That evening, Marcus was helping his mother with her dinner when Charlotte rushed into the room, her motorized wheelchair moving faster than he'd ever seen it. It's happening, she announced breathlessly. Dad just called from the board meeting. They've seen the preliminary documentation of your recovery, and it's changed everything. Several directors are now supporting the research program. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders, one he hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. So they're not firing your dad? Not anymore, the tide is turning. Charlotte's eyes shone with excitement. And there's more. 3 prominent neurologists have contacted the foundation asking to collaborate on expanded trials. The news spread quickly through the treatment team. By the following morning, the atmosphere in the hospital wing had transformed from cautious optimism to outright celebration. Denise continued to show steady improvement, now able to form complete sentences with less effort and move her fingers with increasing precision. 3 days later, with support from physical therapists, Denise attempted her first steps since the crisis. Marcus stood anxiously nearby as she was carefully lifted to a standing position between parallel bars. Take your time, Mrs. Johnson, the therapist encouraged. We're just assessing today, not expecting miracles. But Denise's face set with determination as she gripped the bars. With tremendous effort, she managed to slide her right foot forward a few inches, then her left. The movement was small, unsteady, and visibly exhausting, but it was undeniably a step. "You did it, Mom," Marcus exclaimed, unable to contain his emotion. Charlotte and Thomas watched from the doorway, their expressions a mixture of joy and hope, not just for Denise, but for what her progress might mean for Charlotte's future. That night, Thomas received an unexpected phone call from the hospital lobby. Moments later, he entered Denise's room, where Marcus was reading aloud to his mother. "We have visitors," Thomas announced. "Members of the regulatory committee have arrived for an unscheduled inspection of our research protocols." Marcus felt a surge of panic. "Is that bad?" "It could be," Thomas admitted. "They rarely make surprise visits unless there's been a complaint or concern raised." Denise struggled to sit up straighter in her bed. "Let them come. They should see what this treatment can do." As Thomas left to escort the inspectors to the research floor first, Marcus noticed his mother's determined expression, the same one she'd worn when fighting for her patients as a nurse. "Are you sure you're up for this?" he asked worriedly. "Marcus," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been since waking, "after hearing what Thomas risked to give me this chance, how can I not fight for others to have the same opportunity?" The evening before the inspectors were scheduled to interview Denise formally, she looked out the hospital window at the illuminated city and confessed her greatest fear to Marcus. "Tomorrow I'll speak for everyone suffering like me, but what if my voice, which I've barely recovered, fails at the most important moment?" Marcus gently woke his mother before dawn, the first pale light barely visible through the hospital window. Today was the day of her testimony before the regulatory committee, a moment that could determine not just her future, but potentially thousands of others suffering from MS. "It's time, Mom," he said softly, helping her sit up in bed. "The big day." Denise nodded, her eyes clearer than they had been in months, despite the lingering fear she'd confessed the night before. "I need to look professional," she said, her speech still measured but significantly improved. "Can you get the blue blouse from the closet?" As Marcus helped her prepare, he couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. Just weeks ago, she had been clinically dead for nearly 4 minutes. Now she was insisting on wearing earrings and having her hair properly styled for her appearance before the committee. "You're going to be amazing," he assured her, helping to fasten a simple necklace around her neck. "Just speak from your heart. Tell them your truth." Dr. Patel arrived to perform a final assessment before the hearing. "Your vitals are strong, Mrs. Johnson," he reported with evident satisfaction. "And your neural activity continues to show remarkable patterns of regeneration." "Will I be strong enough to speak?" Denise asked, the worry evident in her voice. "We've arranged for amplification, and you can take breaks as needed," Dr. Patel assured her. "The committee has been informed of your condition and will accommodate your needs." When they arrived at the imposing federal building in downtown Chicago, Marcus was stunned by the crowd gathered outside. Dozens of people with MS and their families stood holding handmade signs with messages like, "Give us hope," and "Approve HTNR7." How did they know? Marcus wondered aloud as their specially equipped van navigated through the crowd. Thomas, who had met them at the hospital entrance, smiled slightly. "Charlotte may have shared your mother's video on some MS support forums. It appears to have resonated." Reporters swarmed as Denise was carefully transferred to a wheelchair. Camera flashes popped and microphones were thrust forward as journalists called out questions. "Mrs. Johnson, how do you respond to claims that you're being exploited by Hawthorne Industries? Is it true the treatment nearly killed you before showing results?" Thomas stepped protectively in front of Denise, while Marcus leaned down to whisper, "You don't have to talk to them." But Denise surprised them both by raising her hand slightly, quieting the reporters. "I am here," she said slowly but clearly, "because this treatment is giving me back my life. That's all I want to say for now." Inside the building, they were escorted to a large hearing room where a panel of 7 officials sat behind a curved table. The room was already packed with spectators, medical professionals, industry representatives, patient advocates, and curious onlookers. Charlotte was waiting for them near the front row, her wheelchair positioned in a reserved space. Despite the serious occasion, her face brightened when she saw them. "There are representatives from 5 major patient advocacy groups here," she whispered excitedly as they took their places, "and 3 competing pharmaceutical companies looking very nervous." Marcus noticed several executives in expensive suits glaring at Thomas. "Are those Hawthorne board members?" he asked. Charlotte nodded. "The faction that wanted Dad removed. They're here to distance themselves if things go poorly and take credit if they go well." The hearing began with formal introductions and an explanation of procedures. Dr. Patel was called first, presenting detailed clinical data from Denise's case. His presentation was meticulously prepared, comparing her brain scans from before treatment, during the crisis, and the remarkable recovery period. "As you can see from these imaging sequences," Dr. Patel concluded, highlighting a series of colored brain maps, "we're observing neural remyelination patterns previously considered impossible in advanced MS cases." A representative from a competing pharmaceutical company was next, arguing that the treatment posed unacceptable risks and had circumvented established safety protocols. "Hawthorne Industries has essentially conducted an unauthorized clinical trial on a vulnerable patient," the man asserted smugly. "This sets a dangerous precedent that undermines the entire regulatory framework designed to protect patients." Thomas tensed visibly, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. When it was his turn to speak, he approached the podium with rigid composure. "Distinguished committee members," he began, his voice steady despite the obvious pressure, "I stand before you not primarily as the CEO of Hawthorne Industries, but as a father whose daughter suffers from the same condition as Denise Johnson." A murmur ran through the audience as Thomas gestured toward Charlotte. "My daughter was diagnosed with progressive multiple sclerosis 2 years ago. When conventional treatments began failing, I did what any parent would do. I sought alternatives." His testimony detailed the development process of HTNR7, acknowledging that while procedures had been accelerated, no safety steps had been skipped. "Yes, I expedited processes that typically take years," Thomas admitted. "But every safety protocol was followed, every animal study completed. What we eliminated was bureaucratic delay, not scientific rigor." The committee questioned him aggressively about his motivations and the potential conflicts of interest involved. One particularly hostile committee member pressed Thomas repeatedly about profit projections for the new medication. "This is ultimately about boosting Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals' bottom line, isn't it, Mr. Hawthorne?" Thomas's face hardened. "If that were my primary concern, I would have pursued medications with much broader markets and fewer development challenges. The truth is, I would gladly give away every dose of HTNR7 if it meant my daughter and patients like Denise could walk again." Finally, it was Denise's turn to testify. As she was wheeled to the front of the room, Marcus noticed her hands trembling slightly. Not from her MS symptoms, but from nervousness. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly before taking his seat. When Denise reached for the microphone, her hand shook visibly, causing a momentary feedback squeal that echoed through the room. Marcus saw panic flash across her face as the tremor intensified under the pressure of all eyes upon her. He instinctively started to rise, wanting to help, but Charlotte caught his arm and whispered, "Wait, give her a moment." Denise closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, a calm determination had replaced the fear. Her hand steadied as she adjusted the microphone. "My name is Denise Johnson," she began, her voice soft but clear. 3 months ago, I couldn't feed myself because of tremors. I couldn't work. I could barely be a mother to my son. She paused, gathering strength. As a nurse for 15 years, I understood exactly what was happening to my body. I knew the prognosis. I knew that conventional treatments were failing me. With careful precision, Denise described her medical journey, occasionally using technical terminology from her nursing background that clearly impressed the committee. She explained the progression of her symptoms, the failure of standard medications, and finally, her experience with HTNR7. Yes, there was a crisis, she acknowledged, meeting the eyes of the most skeptical committee member. My body reacted severely to the treatment, but what followed was something I had been told was impossible. My nervous system began to heal. She gestured to her hands, now steady as she held the microphone. These hands couldn't hold a spoon 3 months ago. Now they can. That isn't symptom management. That's actual repair. As Denise continued, her voice grew stronger, more confident. Marcus watched with swelling pride as his mother transformed before his eyes from a patient into an advocate, her medical knowledge allowing her to address technical questions with unexpected precision. The risks of this treatment are real, she concluded. I experienced them firsthand. But for patients like me, and like Charlotte Hawthorne, those risks are worth taking when the alternative is certain decline. After Denise finished, something unexpected happened. An elderly man in the audience slowly rose to his feet, leaning heavily on a cane. My name is Dr. Robert Lindstrom, he announced in a quavering voice. I've had MS for 20 years, and am a neurologist specializing in the disease. I've reviewed the data presented today, and I implore this committee, give us the chance to try this treatment. We understand the risks. What we cannot accept is having hope withheld because of procedural concerns. One by one, other patients in the audience stood, each briefly sharing their stories and asking for access to the treatment. The spontaneous testimony continued for nearly 30 minutes, creating a powerful emotional current in the room that even the most stoic committee members couldn't ignore. When the last patient had spoken, the committee chair adjusted her glasses and leaned toward her microphone. It is unusual for this committee to offer preliminary opinions before formal deliberations, she said carefully. However, I believe I speak for many of my colleagues when I say the testimony today has been extraordinarily compelling. She looked directly at Denise. Mrs. Johnson, your courage in sharing your experience, combined with the clinical data presented by Dr. Patel, strongly suggests that further investigation of HTNR7 is warranted. Hope surged through the room as she continued. We will require independent verification of all data, of course, and a formal protocol for expanded testing. But I believe we can expedite this process given the circumstances. As the hearing adjourned for deliberations, Thomas was immediately surrounded by reporters and patient advocates. In the commotion, an aide approached him discreetly, handing him a tablet displaying an urgent news alert. Marcus caught only a glimpse of the headline as he helped his mother back to her wheelchair, but it was enough to understand the situation's gravity. Breaking: Hawthorne Industries Board votes to remove founder as CEO. The morning of the regulatory hearing dawned bright and clear, casting golden light across Chicago's skyline. For Marcus, it felt symbolic, a new day bringing the possibility of a brighter future, not just for his mother, but potentially for thousands of MS patients like her. Ready for this? He asked Denise, helping her into the dress she had selected for the occasion. A simple navy blue outfit that made her look professional despite her still frail appearance. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, her voice stronger than the previous evening, but still carrying the hesitation that had become characteristic of her speech. I just hope I can find the right words when it matters. The journey to the federal building took them through the heart of downtown Chicago. Thomas had arranged for a specially equipped medical transport van, complete with a nurse to monitor Denise's condition. As they approached their destination, Marcus was startled to see the size of the crowd gathered outside. People lined the sidewalks, many holding signs with messages like, "Approve HTNR7 and give MS patients a chance." Some sat in wheelchairs nearly identical to Charlotte's, their faces etched with the same mixture of hope and determination he had come to recognize. "Look, Mom," Marcus said, pointing through the window. "All these people are here to support you." Denise's eyes widened as she took in the scene. "Not just me," she corrected gently. "They're here for themselves, for their loved ones. They need this treatment as much as I did." As their van pulled up to the entrance, reporters swarmed forward, cameras flashing and microphones extended. Security personnel created a narrow path for them, keeping the press at bay as Thomas helped guide Denise's wheelchair toward the door. Marcus walked protectively beside his mother, overwhelmed by the sudden public nature of their private struggle. Inside the imposing marble lobby, Charlotte waited for them, her face alight with nervous excitement. "The hearing room is packed," she reported. "Every seat taken. They even have people standing along the walls." Thomas nodded, straightening his tie with a practiced gesture that didn't quite hide his anxiety. "Marcus, stay close to your mother. Charlotte, you'll be seated in the reserved area up front." The hearing room was indeed filled beyond capacity. Marcus recognized pharmaceutical executives in expensive suits, medical professionals in white coats, and ordinary citizens who likely had personal connections to MS. All. Conversations hushed as they entered, hundreds of eyes turning to watch Denise's progress down the center aisle. The regulatory committee sat on a raised platform at the front of the room, 7 serious-faced individuals whose decisions could determine the fate of the treatment and, by extension, countless patients. Their expressions revealed nothing as Thomas and his team took their places at the designated table. "The Committee for Experimental Treatment Protocols will now come to order," announced the chairwoman, a stern-looking woman with silver-rimmed glasses. "Today, we examine the case of experimental compound HTNR7, developed by Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals, and its application in the treatment of progressive multiple sclerosis." The proceedings began with technical presentations. Dr. Patel expertly walked the committee through detailed medical data, his calm professionalism lending credibility to the astonishing results depicted in the brain scans and neurological assessments. "As you can see," he concluded, pointing to the final slide showing comparative imagery of Denise's neural activity, "these patterns of remyelination were previously considered impossible in cases of advanced progression." The committee members leaned forward, examining the images with obvious interest. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't deny the visual evidence of improvement. Next came the opposition. Representatives from competing pharmaceutical companies who questioned the ethics of the accelerated testing protocol and raised concerns about long-term safety. One particularly aggressive speaker accused Hawthorne Industries of dangerous corner-cutting that prioritizes profit over patient safety. Marcus watched his mother's face during these accusations, noting how she pressed her lips together, clearly eager to respond but waiting her turn. Beside him, Thomas maintained a composed expression, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his frustration. When Thomas finally approached the podium, he addressed the committee with careful precision. "Distinguished members, I stand before you not primarily as the CEO of Hawthorne Industries, but as a father whose daughter's future depends on treatment innovation." He gestured toward Charlotte, whose presence in her wheelchair made his point more eloquently than words could. "Yes, we expedited certain administrative processes," he acknowledged, "but we never compromised on scientific rigor or safety protocols. Every required test was performed, every safety measure implemented. What we eliminated was needless delay, not necessary caution." The committee questioned him rigorously about his dual role as a pharmaceutical executive and the father of a potential patient. "How can we be certain that your personal stake in this treatment hasn't clouded your judgment regarding risks?" asked one member pointedly. My personal stake has sharpened my focus on both safety and efficacy, Thomas countered. I would never administer to another person's child what I wouldn't give to my own. Throughout the questioning, Marcus noticed Thomas frequently checking his phone, a frown deepening on his face with each glance. Something beyond the hearing was clearly troubling him, but he maintained his focus on the proceedings. When it was finally Denise's turn to testify, Marcus felt his heart pounding with anxiety for his mother. She looked so small as her wheelchair was positioned before the committee, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "My name is Denise Johnson," she began, her voice initially weak. "I was a pediatric nurse for 15 years before MS forced me to stop working." A slight tremor in her hand caused the microphone to shake, producing feedback that squealed through the room. Marcus saw panic flash across his mother's face, her confidence wavering at this small failure of control. "Take your time, Mrs. Johnson," the chairwoman said, with unexpected gentleness. Denise took a deep breath, and when she continued, her voice had found new strength. "As both a medical professional and a patient, I bring a unique perspective to this discussion. I understood exactly what was happening as my body betrayed me. I knew the prognosis. I recognized when standard treatments began failing." With growing confidence, she described her deterioration, the loss of independence, and finally, the desperate hope offered by the experimental treatment. Her nursing background allowed her to use precise medical terminology that clearly impressed the committee. "Yes, I experienced a severe adverse reaction," she acknowledged directly. "I was clinically dead for nearly 4 minutes, but what followed was something I had been told was medically impossible. My nervous system began to heal." She held up her hand, now steady as she demonstrated fine motor control by picking up a pen and signing her name on the testimony document. "3 months ago, I couldn't hold a spoon without assistance. Today, I can write my name. That isn't symptom management. That's repair of damage previously considered permanent." As Denise concluded her testimony, an electrical current seemed to run through the room. The clinical data was compelling, but her lived experience, articulated with both medical knowledge and personal authenticity, had transformed abstract numbers into human reality. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. An elderly man in the audience slowly stood, supporting himself with a cane. "My name is Dr. Alan Forrester," he announced in a wavering voice. "I've had MS for 22 years, and I'm a neurologist who has specialized in treating this disease for 4 decades. The committee chairman looked startled. "Sir, this isn't an open forum." "With respect," the man continued, "I've reviewed the data presented today. As both a physician and a patient, I'm imploring this committee to approve expanded access. We understand the risks. What we cannot accept is having hope withheld because of bureaucratic caution." His words seemed to break a dam. One by one, other patients in the audience rose, each briefly sharing their stories and pleading for access to the treatment. A middle-aged woman described how she could no longer play with her grandchildren. A young man explained how he had lost his career as a surgeon when his hands became unreliable. The committee chairman repeatedly attempted to restore order, but the spontaneous testimony continued, creating a powerful current of emotion that swept through the room. When the last patient had spoken, the chairwoman adjusted her glasses and consulted briefly with her colleagues before leaning toward her microphone. "While it is unusual for this committee to offer preliminary opinions before formal deliberations," she began carefully, "I believe I speak for many of my colleagues when I say the testimony today has been extraordinarily compelling." She looked directly at Denise. "The combination of robust clinical data and Mrs. Johnson's first-hand account suggests that expedited consideration of expanded access to HTNR7 is warranted." A ripple of excitement passed through the room as she continued. "We will require independent verification of all data and a formal protocol for expanded testing, but I believe we can accelerate this process given the circumstances." Thomas allowed himself a small smile of victory, reaching over to squeeze Charlotte's shoulder. Marcus felt tears of relief stinging his eyes as he grasped his mother's hand. The hearing adjourned with the committee promising a preliminary decision within 48 hours, lightning speed by regulatory standards. As they prepared to leave, Thomas was immediately surrounded by reporters shouting questions about the treatment's future availability. In the midst of the commotion, a young aide in a dark suit approached Thomas, handing him a tablet with an urgent expression. Marcus watched as the billionaire's face transformed while reading whatever message had been delivered. "What is it?" Marcus asked when Thomas finally extracted himself from the press scrum. Thomas handed the tablet to Marcus, his expression unreadable. The screen displayed an urgent news alert. "Breaking. Hawthorne Industries Board votes to remove founder as CEO." "Sir, the board has just voted. You're no longer the CEO of the company you built," the aide said quietly, taking back the tablet with an apologetic expression. Thomas looked at the news alert on the tablet with surprising calm, his eyes scanning the headline announcing his removal as CEO. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unexpected note of relief rather than defeat. "Some things are worth more than a corporate title," he said to Marcus, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "But your company, everything you built, is still there," Thomas finished. "And more importantly, so is your mother. So is Charlotte. And now, so is hope for thousands of others." 1 month later, the regulatory committee's decision arrived. Conditional approval for an expanded study including 200 patients. The document, filled with technical stipulations and monitoring requirements, represented a stunning victory in a field where approvals typically took years, not weeks. Marcus sat beside his mother's bed in the newly established Hawthorne Rehabilitation Center, a modern facility in Chicago's northern suburbs designed specifically for neurological recovery. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating a space that bore little resemblance to a traditional hospital room. Plants, comfortable furniture, and advanced rehabilitation equipment created an environment focused on healing rather than merely treating illness. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Marcus asked, helping his mother adjust her position in preparation for her physical therapy session. Denise smiled, her expressions now more fluid, her speech clearer with each passing day. "Not in my wildest dreams. 3 months ago, I was simply hoping to manage my symptoms enough to function. Now I'm actually recovering." Thomas had transformed his personal fortune into the Hawthorne Foundation for Neurological Research, ensuring the treatment would be accessible regardless of patients' financial circumstances. The board that had removed him as CEO now watched as Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals' stock soared on news of the breakthrough treatment, a development that brought Thomas a certain wry satisfaction. 6 months after the regulatory hearing, Denise stood between parallel bars in the rehabilitation center's physical therapy room, determination etched on her face as she prepared to take another step without assistance. Marcus recorded the moment on his phone, knowing this milestone deserved documentation. "You've got this, Mom," he encouraged as she lifted her foot carefully. With focused concentration, Denise took one step, then another, her movements growing more confident with each forward motion. By the 5th step, tears were streaming down her face, not from pain, but from the sheer joy of movement reclaimed. "I'm doing it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm really walking." Marcus rushed forward to embrace her as the physical therapists applauded the achievement. In the doorway, Thomas stood beside Charlotte, both watching with expressions of profound hope. Charlotte's own progress had been slower, but equally significant. As the second official patient in the study, she had begun treatment 3 weeks after the hearing. The advanced state of her disease meant improvements came more gradually, but they were unmistakable. Where once she had been losing function week by week, she was now regaining mobility in small but meaningful increments. "Next week, they're removing the restraints on my wheelchair," Charlotte told Marcus as they shared lunch in the center's sunny atrium. "Dr. Patel thinks I'm ready to try the walker." Their friendship had deepened through shared experience, transforming two strangers into something closer to family. Charlotte's quick intellect and dry humor complemented Marcus's seriousness, while his unwavering determination inspired her on difficult days. 1 year after his desperate plea on the sidewalk outside Chicago Memorial Hospital, Marcus stood before his science class, presenting his award-winning project on neural remyelination. His research, mentored by Dr. Patel, had earned top honors at the regional science fair and an invitation to the national competition. The destruction of myelin sheaths in multiple sclerosis has traditionally been considered irreversible, he explained to his classmates, with a confidence that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. However, recent breakthroughs suggest that targeted therapies can stimulate the body's natural repair mechanisms under specific conditions. His teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, watched with undisguised pride. She had witnessed Marcus's transformation from a distracted, overwhelmed student to a focused young scholar with clear purpose. His grades had improved dramatically across all subjects, but his passion for medicine and neuroscience burned particularly bright. Thomas had begun mentoring Marcus in his studies, recognizing in the boy an exceptional mind that thrived on challenge. What had begun as simple tutoring sessions evolved into deep discussions about medical ethics, research methodologies, and the complex intersection of science and business. "You think like both a scientist and a humanitarian," Thomas told him after reading one of his essays. "That's a rare and valuable combination." 2 years after Denise's treatment began, she resumed work part-time as a consultant to the patient support program at the Hawthorne Center. Her unique perspective, as both a medical professional and a patient, made her invaluable in helping others navigate their treatment journey. "The physical recovery is only part of the process," she often told new patients. "The emotional and psychological aspects are equally important." Her growing confidence and improving health transformed not just her body, but her entire outlook. The woman who had once been defined by her illness now defined herself by her contributions to others' healing. Dr. Patel had become the medical director of the expanding research program, which now included collaboration with 5 major universities and dozens of specialists worldwide. What had begun as a desperate gamble with a single patient had evolved into a groundbreaking research initiative that was redefining treatment possibilities for multiple sclerosis and potentially other neurological conditions. 3 years into this new chapter of their lives, Marcus sat in the office of his high school guidance counselor, discussing his college applications. "Your academic record is outstanding, Marcus," the counselor said, reviewing his transcript. "With these grades and your extracurricular involvement in medical research, you have excellent chances at top-tier schools." "I want to apply to the University of Chicago's pre-med program," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Their neuroscience department is working directly with the Hawthorne Foundation." The acceptance letter arrived on a bright spring morning. Marcus raced to the rehabilitation center, where his mother was conducting a support group session, waiting impatiently outside the door until she finished. "I got in," he announced, waving the letter as soon as she emerged. "Full scholarship to University of Chicago pre-med." Denise embraced him, no longer needing a cane for short distances. "I never doubted you for a moment," she said, her voice now clear and strong. "From the day you stood on that sidewalk fighting for my treatment, I knew you were destined for medicine." Dr. Patel, passing by in the hallway, stopped to congratulate him. "We'll expect you in the research lab this summer as an intern," he said with a smile. "There's a project I've been saving specifically for you." In the years that followed, Marcus flourished in the demanding pre-medical program while maintaining his connection to the Hawthorne Foundation's research. Thomas and Denise, had established the Denise Johnson Scholarship for Neurological Research, ensuring that promising students with limited financial resources could pursue careers in the field. 4 years after that desperate day outside Chicago Memorial, Marcus stood at a podium facing his fellow incoming medical students at the University of Chicago. As the top student in his entering class, he had been selected to deliver the incoming address, an honor that reflected not just his academic achievements, but the unique journey that had brought him to medicine. In the front row, Denise sat proudly beside Thomas and Charlotte. Denise now walked with only a lightweight cane for longer distances, her recovery far exceeding what any specialist had initially thought possible. Charlotte, though still using a walker for support, had regained significant function and was completing her own degree in biomedical engineering through online courses. Thomas, no longer defined by his corporate title, had found a new identity as a leading advocate for innovative medical research. The Hawthorne Foundation had expanded to support breakthrough treatments for multiple neurological conditions, focusing particularly on diseases affecting children and young adults. As Marcus looked out at the sea of white coats before him, he took a deep breath and began the speech he had carefully prepared for this moment. My journey to medicine began when I was only 12 years old, desperately shouting to a stranger on the sidewalk, "I don't need money. I just need someone to help my mom." Marcus paused, finding the eyes of his mother and Thomas in the front row. What I've learned since then is that sometimes, when we cry out for help, the universe doesn't just respond. It transforms us into the very helpers we've been seeking. The audience erupted in applause as Marcus continued, sharing the story of his mother's recovery and the unlikely partnership that had developed between a desperate 12-year-old boy and one of Chicago's most powerful businessmen. As the ceremony concluded and students dispersed to begin orientation activities, Thomas leaned toward Denise in the now emptying auditorium. "Your son is truly extraordinary," he said quietly. Denise smiled, wiping away a tear as she watched Marcus across the room, already deep in conversation with one of the neuroscience professors. "He always was," she replied. "He just needed someone who would stop to listen to what he was really asking for."